Welcome back. We have the fabulous Kevin Cronister back with us today for round 2 of our conversation. Kevin's going to walk us through what we're calling the Predator's Playbook, how grooming actually works, like the step-by-step process they follow. And Kevin is a veteran ICAC investigator. He has gone undercover, talked with lots of different pedophiles. He has done lots in this space. And so he's back to walk us through the exact steps predators follow when they're grooming kids, because the process actually is pretty methodical. And the more we understand it, the better we can prepare and protect our children. And we're going to try to have this conversation in a way that you can have your kids listen to this, where you can be like, hey, listen to this so that they can be knowledgeable about what to look for to recognize if someone is grooming them, right? If they're in a situation. So as kids know and as the parents know, we'll just help keep kids safer. Kevin Cronister is one of only about 100 to 200 officers for the ICAC task force, and he's a veteran investigator with them. And they are sorting through over 36 million child exploitation tips that get reported to NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. What he shares is going to open your eyes, guys, and empower you with steps to keep your kids safer. I welcome you to the Keep Kids Safe podcast, a faith-fueled podcast for Christian parents who want to guard their kids from online and offline dangers. I'm your host, Sarah Panus, and I have over 20 years of experience as a content marketing expert, but I'm also a mom of 2 that is very interested in this topic of keeping kids safe. And I started going down this path of trying to figure out what I can do to help keep my own kids safe and other kids. And here's what I realized. We are not powerless. There's hope. We don't have to dig our head in the sand, because informed adults are the most powerful protection children have. Because when we're smarter and more observant and more aware, we can help guide and protect them in more ways, give them the knowledge that they'll need to keep themselves safer. So on this show, each episode is meant to be bite-sized, not overwhelming, and everything follows my SAFE acronym, SAFE, to see the risk clearly, anchor in God's truth, focus on one simple action, to ultimately empower your family with habits and conversations that build lasting confidence. That's what SAFE stands for as we work to keep all kids safe. So let's dive into today's episode. First, we're going to start with the Bible verse to root ourselves for this episode. And this one comes from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. And it says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. So we are exposing the heck out of darkness today, guys. Kids are going to be so knowledgeable, parents are going to be so knowledgeable that we're like, whatever, you cannot groom me because I know what the heck is going on. So that's what I want you to feel like after you listen to this episode. Okay, to kick things off, time for the first trivia question. How many steps are commonly involved in the online grooming process? Is it 2? Is it 6? Is it 10? Which one? It is 10. We are going to walk through, Kevin's going to walk us through the 10 common steps of the online grooming process. So Kevin, predators are methodical in how they groom kids. You've told me this. Can you walk us through the key steps that they take from that first contact to building trust and then shifting into manipulation, and explain why their patience makes them so hard to detect? So lay it all on us, and then we'll dig into things as we go along.
Absolutely. And if your answer was 6, I just want to say that some documents combine the steps. So technically, if you said 6, you could be right also. So you mentioned building trust and friendship. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to try to figure out a way to build a relationship with your child where they seem like the fun adult, right? Or someone who understands what your child is going through. In the last episode, we talked about the video games. That's where we see it a lot, but the adults will hop on there and they'll play the video games with your child. And that's a perfect place for them to start to get to know your child and develop some trust. And also be the fun adult, right? Most of us as parents, we're not constantly down there playing video games with our kids because we have lots of responsibilities. And so they probably don't have very many responsibilities, or they wouldn't be grooming children. So they will be looked at as the fun adult, right? They can play video games whenever they want to. And so your child will start to develop a relationship with them. So that's step 1, is building trust and friendship. The second step is to gain access and isolation of your child. So what they're going to do is attempt to isolate your child from you. So once they start building a friendship, they're going to start to ask some questions about home life. Oh, you weren't on yesterday. Did you get grounded, or did something happen? And your child will say, yeah, I got in trouble. Oh man, your mom sounds horrible. I would never have disciplined you for that. That's not a big deal. And they start to isolate your child from you by making you out to be maybe the bad guy or the adult who doesn't understand them. And they're specifically looking for children who have difficult home lives. So the idea of learning about how you parent is a big underlying theme of the grooming process. The third step is testing boundaries or desensitization. So after they gain access to your child, develop this relationship, and maybe isolate them a little bit, they're going to test your child's boundaries. So maybe they'll make a very somewhat innocent comment that maybe has a sexual connotation to it, or an inappropriate joke or something along those lines, to see how your child reacts, right? Because if your child has a very strong negative reaction to that kind of thing, like, dude, that was incredibly inappropriate, like, don't say that again, they're probably going to back off and end up finding another child. But if your child is, oh, ha, then they're going to continue to kind of push because they want to desensitize. A specific example that I have from one of my investigations is they would send videos of animals doing various things, right? Maybe dogs mating or something like that, and be like, ha ha, oh my gosh, look at this video. This is hilarious. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to introduce sexual topics without broaching it on the human side, because there's a delineation there, right? Kids don't see necessarily the animals doing something like that is super inappropriate. And so it's a way for them to desensitize them to that kind of a topic. And then number 4, giving gifts and special treatment. So we talked in the previous episode about Roblox and Fortnite and maybe the V-Bucks gifting skins or characters. They're going to kind of create a sense of obligation within your child, right? Oh man, I don't want to play today, but this guy gave me that skin yesterday and he says he wants to see me play with it. So I feel like I should get on and play with him. So they create this sense of obligation to where now your kid feels like he has to get on and play with this guy regularly because this guy is giving him things, and kids are inherently gracious and innocent. They don't want to hurt this guy's feelings, so they're going to keep playing. And then the 5th is they'll start creating some secrets. So they will say something, maybe they'll use an inappropriate word, a cuss word, or say something derogatory. And then they'll say, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. That has to stay between us, because if anybody finds out that I said that, they might not let you play with me anymore. And I don't want that to happen. So then they start getting your kids to keep secrets, right? And so you can see the direction that this is heading, right? So they're testing whether or not your child can keep secrets, whether or not they have a strong reaction to inappropriate discussions or inappropriate videos. And then eventually they move into step 6, which is manipulating their emotions. So now they're going to start to use guilt or fear, or maybe make your kid feel ashamed, right? Hey, you really don't want me to get in trouble, do you? Like, you can't tell your parents that we're having these discussions because I could get in a lot of trouble. And remember, I sent you that video and you thought it was funny. So if you tell on me, you're telling on yourself too, and you thought the video was funny. So doesn't that say something about you? So then now your kid's confused, because now your kid's, oh, maybe I'm also like inappropriate. And maybe I'm also, so maybe I shouldn't tell my parents. Maybe this guy really is the only one that understands me. And so then now they've got this shame about the things that they've talked about with this guy. And maybe by this time, the discussion has turned more explicitly inappropriate. And so now your child really does feel shame, because they're like, we talked about some pretty inappropriate stuff. So there's no way I could ever tell my parents, because I'm just as much at fault as this guy, right?
And they don't want to get in trouble with their
They don't
parents.
want
So
to get
they're
in
like,
trouble.
gosh,
Yep. Yep.
Mm.
And then step 7 is using technology and social media. So they will try to take the child off of whatever the game is to a different social media platform. So some type of a messaging app like Telegram or Instagram, or name the messaging app. They'll try to move the child to the messaging app because it's easier for them to communicate with your child on a messaging app, obviously, than like a video game. And plus, they're going to have to move them to a different app if they want to send things, like I mentioned before, videos or images. Those can't be sent within the video game. So there's some overlap to these steps, but obviously, the main format is the most important part. And then the exchange of photos is eventually, in a later step, going to be used potentially for blackmail to keep your child in their place, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
So then, number 8, they're going to want to try to exploit family and community relationships. They might also make friends with your child's siblings, so your other kids on the same game. And then that's another point of leverage that they have over your kid, right? I play with your big brother and he doesn't seem to mind what we talk about. So I'm not sure why you're all of a sudden upset that we discuss these things. It seems kind of silly to me. So then now your kid is not only ashamed of what they've been talking about, but now they think that they're somehow weird because they find it inappropriate, and they're using your other children as a way to basically gaslight your child into believing that, well, your brother doesn't care, so why do you care? Which obviously most likely is not true, but your
Right.
child doesn't know that. And they don't know that because they can't communicate with anybody about this because of the shame and the worry and the fear. And then step 9 is gradual exposure to more explicit sexual content. So this is where the actual videos and images are going to start to be exchanged that are what we refer to as child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, which is they start to talk your child into sending a video or an image of something kind of innocent, right? Like, hey, you went to the pool. Let me see what your swimsuit looks like. And then, oh man, that swimsuit, I can see a lot of your tummy in that swimsuit. That's kind of embarrassing. And then we'll send one that's a little bit more explicit. And if you don't, then I'm going to show everybody this one of your swimsuit and how embarrassing it is that your tummy's out. And then, so then your kid's going to send them a more explicit image or video, right? And then that one's going to be held over their head. And it's just going to go downhill from there. And most children continue this process because kids are very simplistic. Not to say they're not intelligent, but they're very, okay, well, if I don't do this, he's going to do this. So that means I need to do this. And then they will send the additional video or image. And then it just keeps spiraling. And then the last step is they make your child feel responsible for what happened. And so that means, hey, you sent that video to me. I mean, I was just joking. You're the one that sent the video to me, and you didn't stop me from discussing these things with you. So it sounds to me like you really wanted to talk about them. And then at the end of step number 10, your child is in a position where this individual has blackmail over them because they have images or videos of your child. They've gaslighted them into believing that maybe even their siblings or their friends don't think it's a big deal. So why do you think it's such a big deal? They've got the emotional manipulation of, maybe I'm just as inappropriate as this guy because he's right. I didn't really say anything when he was talking about that. And so then it just becomes this multifaceted web of control over your child. And the unfortunate reality is that if you don't have a good communicative relationship with your child, this will go on without you knowing. And you may not even really see any signs of it unless you have a really good pulse on your child's emotional interactions and how they usually behave and what they usually do during the day. So that's why the communication piece is so important.
It just feels sick and icky, right? As you talk
Oh
about it,
yeah.
just thinking that people are doing this, but it exists and it can feel overwhelming and gross. I have a follow-up question. Are these predators generally, are they admitting they're adults talking to kids, or do they pretend they're kids talking to kids? Kind of what is that dynamic like?
So it kind of depends. Sometimes they will pretend to be kids up until the last minute, and then there will be like this great reveal of, yeah, well, haha, I'm actually an adult and I have these photos and videos of you. So if you don't send me your parents' credit card
Yeah.
information,
And
then
we
I'm,
had an episode where a mom came on where her son fell victim to that and sent an
yes,
inappropriate photo to someone he thought was a girl, and it wasn't a girl, it was an adult that tried to
perfect.
blackmail him for money. So that's a previous episode, guys,
Yes.
that you
So
can listen to
that's,
around that. So that's why I asked. I'm like curious kind of what that mix is, but it
mhm.
sounds like it's both.
It is,
Depends what scam they're trying to run.
yes. And I will say that that one is probably a little bit different than what we're discussing today. Today is more your kid knows they're an adult from the very beginning. This is, they start off by playing video games and then they go through the whole grooming process,
Yeah.
and your child knows they're playing with an adult. The other scam is more teenage boys that get caught up in that, and it's usually on like Instagram or some kind of a social media where they immediately see, oh, this is a really attractive girl my age. And then that conversation starts, right? So it does depend on the scam. But for what we're talking about specifically, I'd say that they identify themselves as adults straight out of the
Okay.
gate.
So then the fact that there's a pattern to this in this 10-part process, I know you had shared with me as well that these predators talk with each other and they're like, hey, this really works and this really works. They're fine tuning this process, which is
Yes.
gross. But because there's a pattern, that also means there's a chance to interrupt it. And so, what have you seen when parents proactively educate their kids about these steps of grooming? Like, kind of what is that? Does it significantly help?
Yeah, incredibly significant. When you can identify that the pattern has begun, you can jump in earlier in the process and prevent it. Because the reality is that until they get to the final couple of steps, you can get in there before the images are sent, before the serious damage is done. And then you might just have to have some conversations with your child and work through some of the emotional baggage that might come from even being part of this process. But if you can inject yourself earlier, you can mitigate the damage. And so I think typically what happens is as each step progresses, there's a little bit more emotional and psychological damage that occurs to your child. So the sooner you can inject yourself into the process, the better.
Okay. So let's talk tips then. Action tip, guys. Always want you to walk away feeling like there's something you can do with this. If a parent has never talked to their child about grooming before, obviously we're recording this episode of
Mhm.
something they could listen to. It's a resource like, hey, recognize these 10 steps. That's like red flags for you. Hey, kiddo, as you're doing these things online, if any of this happens, recognize it. What do you think is a simple, maybe age appropriate way to begin the conversation if someone's never talked to their kid about grooming before?
So for me, with my kids, we just started off by discussing the fact that no adult should want to have a conversation with a child by themselves. Like
Amen.
there's never a time where it's appropriate for an adult to say, hey, let's chat. We wouldn't let it happen in real life, right?
Mm.
It would be weird if an adult approached my child and said, hey, let's go over here and talk. My kid would be like,
Right.
that's
Stranger
super
danger
weird,
and
right?
like, right, we've talked about.
Yep. Explain to your kids that the same thing goes for the internet. Just because they're not physically present with you doesn't mean that it's appropriate for them to want to have these conversations with you in private. That allows you to start the conversation with your child about adults. It's broad enough that your child, if they're very young, you don't have to start the discussion about the end goal of all of this for the adult, right? You can avoid the kind of discussion about the sexual immorality of what the adult is trying to do. But it also allows you to start the conversation of boundaries in general. There's two adults in your life, maybe I guess you could include uncles and aunts and grandparents, but there are very few adults in your life that should be having conversations with you in private, right? And so that gives your kids a general thing to watch out for.
And Kevin, what would be a good maybe daily or weekly habit that families can get into to help keep those lines of communication open to what kids are experiencing online?
I just usually have weekly discussions with my kids and we go through their devices. I'll say, hey, dude, bring me your phone. My son just turned 14 the other day and he's got a phone now. And it's a pretty regular thing where I just say, hey, let me see your phone. And I go through it with him. And if there's anything concerning, I ask him. I'm like, hey, there was an Amazon search for swimsuits, right? Something innocent like that. But I want to know, what are you looking for? Your swimsuits? Or are you looking for, you know what I mean? What are you looking for? And a lot of times most of the time he's very honest about that, about what he's looking at. And then it also lets him know that I'm not letting anything slide. Like, I will ask about anything and everything. And what that has created is that's created open lines of communication between he and I, to where now he will bring me his phone and say, hey, Dad, I'm having a hard time. I'm being tempted by some things and I'm tempted to look at some things I shouldn't. So will you take my phone for the night? Which is a huge win, right, in my
Wow.
book.
Yeah.
And so that all started because when he was 8 and he was playing video games, the idea that, like, I was going to be looking over his shoulder, or I was going to be checking up on what he was doing, became normalized. And so now he's 14 and it's still just something that Dad does.
But what if you haven't done that? What if there's a parent listening and they're like, oh man, I have not done that?
It's never too late to start, because the alternative is you don't start, and then and then it never gets any better. There might be some growing pains that you might be sitting down with your 13-year-old daughter who you maybe haven't done a great job of keeping up on what she does on the internet, and now you got to tell her, like, hey, there's going to be some new rules and she's not going to like them.
Mm-hmm.
And I always encourage parents to remember that the phase of your 13-year-old daughter being super mad at you because you gave her these new internet rules is just a phase. And as she gets older, she's going to realize that not only was it the right thing to do, but it was actually you showing her that you love her. Because without those rules, you're showing her that anything goes, you don't really care, right?
Right. It's the short term versus the long term, right?
Yeah.
It's hard as a parent in the thick of it, but I love that advice. Thank you for walking through all of those 10 parts. I will have all of this listed in the show notes, guys, too, so that you can access it and read through it as like a supplement, if you will, to this episode. So thank you so much, Kevin, for coming back on and pulling back this curtain on something that so many parents really never see coming. And so I think you really helped us just understand not what grooming is, but how it happens, and that step-by-step methodical process that these predators are following and sharing with each other. And the good news is, like we said, we can interrupt that process. They're looking
Yes.
for one and it has to check the box before they move on to the next. So if you stop any of those points, it stops that cycle from continuing. Knowledge is a shield. Like when we talk to our kids, stay connected and create these open conversations, we can stop darkness in its tracks. How can people connect with you if they want to know more about this, or what resources should they look at? Tell us all the things.
Yeah, visit www.kidsdigitalhealthhub.com. And on Kids Digital Health Hub, we've got lots of resources, lots of documents, videos, online courses for parents and teachers, et cetera, that parents can look at to educate themselves. And then we also have the Screen Guardians podcast, where every couple of weeks we have episodes that are covering more specific instances of cases that I've worked, and it gives parents an opportunity to see a more in-depth look at each of these different scams and some of the things that we talked about. So kidsdigitalhealthhub.com and the Screen Guardians podcast.